All right, back again, chapter 4. Let's just get into it. I don't want to waste any time because I already have a feeling this chapter is going to be long as balls. I talk about wasting time, and I'm wasting time because I can't get to the chapter. All right, everything's so cheap. It's like living in the 50s, Quinn's dad said, turning the menu over to begin again from page 1. Salisbury steak for $5, and it comes with a side. Side of diabetes? Quinn asked, tentative. She was relieved to see him smile. It had been a rough afternoon since getting home. The school had called Dad, letting him know she'd gotten detention for disciplinary issues. He didn't take it well, began pressing her with questions about acting out. But by the time she'd recounted her story, explaining about YouTube channels, celebrity boys, and a factory fire, a science teacher's Mr. Hyde moment, and a mysterious party invitation, Glenn Maybrook could only chuckle and say, well, I guess don't make it a regular thing. Whoever he'd spoken to from the school hadn't mentioned Founder's Day, and neither had Quinn. Quinn looked around them at the Main Street eatery. Yes, that was the actual name of the restaurant. The establishment was a cross between the greasy spoons that peppered South Philadelphia and the proper diners on the other side of the Delaware River in Jersey. They were seated in one of the booths next to the windows and watched the sleepy late afternoon rush of Kettle Springs. Quinn picked at a splotch of crusted ketchup in front of her, came off easily against her fingernail. Otherwise, the place was not clean enough, but not antiseptic. This was not a chain restaurant, hadn't been plopped down with whole cloth in a weekend. The knickknacks dotting the wall had earned their spots. Missouri's Best Chili, 1998, runner-up plaque hung with pride alongside pictures of the decades of Little League teams that the restaurant had sponsored. As Quinn scrutinized the decorations, she noticed that, oddly enough, nothing seemed to date beyond the early 2000s. It was like time had stopped for the eatery just after the turn of the century. The effect made the eatery seem less like the walls were celebrating the restaurant's place in the community and more like they were preserving the artifacts of a time long past. Quinn's dad was looking down with a private and doofy smile, still perusing the menu. They have chicken fried steak. I've had chicken fried steak since. And he stopped mid-sentence. Quinn knew where the thought was going to end up, more or less. Glenn Maybrick had last had fried chicken with Mom. Somewhere. On a road trip, maybe. Probably before Quinn was born or before she could remember. If he were able to, without crying, he'd tell her that it tasted great, but that it kept them both up all night with indigestion. Anyway, soldiered on, shaking his head. That dish sounds like it would be good for business, a real artery clogger. He kept at it. Do you think it's okay to order something from the breakfast side and something from the lunch? Poring over the menu was the happiest he'd looked in weeks. I think here in the 50s, they'd let time travelers get away with anything they want, Quinn joked. He deserved this. Samantha Maybrook might have robbed both of them of any enduring optimism towards the future, but snatches of occasional fried food inspired happiness really shouldn't be too much to ask. Their waitress came over, looking harried. The woman wore her hair up, in a style that Quinn had only ever glimpsed in pictures and old movies. The beehive. Despite the worry lines on her face and smudges in her makeup, the hairdo was perfect. The waitress wore large mermaid scale earrings that gave her face an unpleasant reptile quality while paired with her blue eyeshadow. Warmly and professionally, the woman fielded Dad's questions about the menu. Quinn glanced to the window to keep from staring at the mold that poked through the waitress's thick foundation. Across the street, she saw a group of men on the corner, one with a banner draped at his feet and the other two pointing up. They were hanging up a sign welcoming everyone to Founder's Day. They seemed to have things under control, so Quinn let her eyes drift down the street. There had been plenty of interesting bumper stickers around town, but she couldn't help but pick out the truck with the gun rack, the "Don't Tread on Me" magnet, and an American flag sticker with a dark blue stripe. Back home, the truck wouldn't have belonged to a Philadelphian, the sticker representing a Pennsyltucky bingo, but in Kettle Springs it was starting to look normal. A kid Quinn didn't recognize walked by the window and she turned away to avoid meeting his gaze. With fresh eyes, Quinn realized that the eatery's clientele skewed much older than at the diner she knew back home, which mostly served as after-school hangouts this early in the night. She remembered how much the waitresses hated the group of teenagers. Sometimes nursing hangovers, kids would take over 3 or 4 tables for hours, ordering milkshakes and fries and demand free refills on Cokes. All that while not historically being great tippers. In fact, In fact, Quinn noticed, there wasn't a single other teenager in the eatery. Unlike the town itself, which seemed sleepy for so early in the evening, the eatery was bustling, a veritable sea of liver spots, soup noises, and mothball stink. After settling on an order, Quinn's dad leaned over the table and said, "I'm gonna hit the head before the food comes." "Thanks for sharing." Quinn pulled out her phone. Usually picking up her phone was muscle memory, but right now she had a purpose. She was going to try looking up her new classmates, fellow detentioneers, on Instagram. Unlocking her phone, she'd overheard her dad say, "Hey, I'm Dr. Maybook. Pardon me, but it looks like you've got a cane there. Well, why don't you stop by and I'll be happy to take a look. I'm at Doc Weller's old practice." Glenn Maybrick conducted a version of this conversation with three separate customers, trying to sell his new practice, but none of his potential patients seemed eager to talk with her dad, which wasn't surprising. A strange man was approaching them and asking how long they'd had that scaly patch of skin below their elbow. It may have been that Quinn was a conspicuous eavesdropper, but every time she raised her eyes above the back of the booth, she saw old, dull eyes staring back at her. Her dad's awkward, glad handing wasn't the problem. No, it wasn't her imagination, it wasn't paranoia. The old folks in the diner weren't talking to her dad because of her. The patrons were responding to her dad's pleasantries by giving Quinn a stare down. Instead of creeping her out like those old, roomy eyes staring at Quinn probably should have, all they did was make her angry. Quinn almost thought to bare her teeth and growl, to really give them something to be afraid of, but caught herself and toyed with the beads of condensation that had formed on her glass of water instead. "Tough crowd," her dad said as he slid back into the booth. Their food arrived a moment later. Quinn's dad cleared his throat to ask their waitress a question, and for one horrible second Quinn was terrified he was going to ask if she'd ever had that mole biopsied. But instead, he'd asked for syrup. "I'd like it on my bacon," he said, as if the request needed explanation, and then inexplicably he winked. The waitress smiled and winked back, if only by gratuity-based reflex. I like that was a bar. Quinn had to admit the food was good. Putting the '50s prices aside, chipped beef on toast had its charms. "This can't be every night," she said between mouthfuls. "We need to do less eating out, less takeout. There's got to be a decent supermarket around here. We're in farmland, right? Where's the farmers markets and the cute roadside stands?" "I don't know, sweetie, but—" Her father trailed off. She heard the sleigh bells affixed to the restaurant's door jingle. Please don't be Cole. That was her first thought, and it surprised her. But she turned in her seat to see it wasn't Cole at the door. It was a grown man clad in what Quinn had always thought of as highway patrolman tan. There was a star on his chest, not the silver badge that Philly cops wore on their belts, but an honest to goodness sheriff's star with more points than seemed necessary. This was a massive man, with reddened, visible pores of someone who was both old and prematurely aged. His thick, rectangular gray mustache was as standard issue as his belt, handcuffs, and sidearm. Quinn tried to imagine him 10 or 20 years younger and just couldn't. She suspected he might have always looked like this. Whatever. The lawman tipped his hat to her father, then removed it. He winked at Quinn and then sat in the booth behind theirs without waiting to be seated, as the sign instructed. Quinn felt the vinyl of the booth's upholstery pull tighter as the man sat back to back with her. She could hear the sound of his spurs settle as he sat, despite the fact that he probably wasn't wearing literal spurs. "Sheriff Dunn, what can I get you?" the waitress said, patting the side of her beehive, searching for the pencil nub that might have disappeared in the early '80s. "The usual. Thanks, Shruti," he said. "Black coffee and a baked potato with cheese coming right up. You're a creature of habit, George," she said, a girlish giggle in her voice. This exchange revealed two things: that Sheriff George Dunn didn't understand how meals worked, and that their waitress was, of course, named Trudy. After the sheriff ordered, the Main Street Eatery released a collective sigh. It didn't seem like fear exactly, but the same kind of star power Cole had exhibited at school playing to a different audience. With the normal din of arthritic hands on silverware resumed, Quinn felt comfortable enough to ask the question she'd been holding in since she'd gotten back from school. "Are you nervous? About my little girl going out to a party?" "No, Dad," she said, suddenly not wanting to joke about the party, especially with the sheriff right behind them. "About seeing your first patients." Her father paused, considering the question. "I'm not nervous. Bit of first day jitters. Never easy being the new kid, even when you're not a kid anymore." "Why? Do I seem nervous?" On your way to the bathroom, you offered to give that lady a pelvic exam. Quinn pointed across from them using her pinky. Her father managed both a laugh and disapproving look at the same time. It was a look he'd been working on since she'd been testing adult conversational waters. After mom died, Quinn had to do a lot of growing up, quickly. While dad might have needed her to be his friend and confidant, and sometime shoulder to cry on, she knew he also missed having her be his, in his words, little girl. So, are you asking if I'm gonna have a breakdown? Yeah, I guess I kinda am. I love you, Quinn. You know that, right? I know. I'm good. I'm in a good place. Kettle Springs is. He searched for the word, then settled for something different. This is what I needed, he said, putting a hand on hers, then correcting himself. What we needed. And you say this like I wasn't at the office all day today. Yeah, but you didn't see any patients. Dr. Wells' departure was really sudden. It's weird. We literally didn't advance the paper on his exam table. Just left it there with someone's butt imprint still on it. I'd canceled today's appointments, but I probably didn't need to. Her dad fiddled with the salt and pepper shakers, mismatched. The salt in simple clear glass and the pepper a ceramic clown face. The good news is that the office has all his equipment. I was expecting to have to do some orders, run at half capacity. I'm amazed he didn't sell that house furnished too. If that was how quick, if that was how quickly he needed to get out, I apologize. Oh, my ear itches. Sorry guys, hold on. This, this one's gonna be long too. I need to strap in, bro. I guess it's not that weird. Wherever he's moving, he probably needs chairs. Quinn said, for the first time since unpacking. It seemed to sink in that their house had been someone else's house earlier this month. It didn't feel right to her, the brevity of it on both ends. It was like Dr. Weller could turn his car around, use his spare keys to walk in when they were home at night, and be like, sorry, changed my mind. GTFO. GTFO. Anyway, her dad kept talking, bringing her attention back. It's excited taking over a practice. But the office also feels. He paused. Don't worry, you'll make it your own soon enough. How many are you seeing tomorrow? There are 3 patients on the schedule. Was supposed to be 4, but one called this morning to cancel. I have no idea if the rest have even been told there's a new sheriff in town. At the turn of the at this turn of phrase, Quinn felt the actual sheriff behind her shift in his seat, so to speak. Her dad adding, flicking his eyebrows up and looking over Quinn's shoulder as Trudy came over to ask how their dinner was. Dad gushed about the food itself, then went on to rave about how the prices were so much more reasonable than back home in Philadelphia. It was more of an answer than Trudy expected. Dad was trying too hard to be neighborly, and he wasn't great at it. He wasn't the kind of doctor what the heck? Who excelled at small talk or bedside manner. It wasn't really his nature. He was a quiet guy, big-hearted, soft. He cared too much but didn't give voice to the care, which was a big part of why they moved to Kettle Springs. Working at a big hospital owned by one of the nation's largest corporate healthcare conglomerates had gotten to Glenn Maybrook. He'd had he'd had to tell too many families that this procedure or that medication wasn't going to be covered by insurance. He'd seen too many kids come in with gunshot wounds and sent them home with bills they couldn't afford to pay. The stress wore on him, but after Mom overdosed, I don't remember that being a part of the lore, he was done. He was just hollowed out. He went through the motions for a year after, afraid to upset the routine, unsure that the ground beneath him wasn't about to open up again. But his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't keep his head in the game. He wasn't sleeping. The diner food was the most she'd seen him eat. More than once, Quinn had woken in the middle of the night to find him sitting in the dark, arguing with a ghost, with Mom. So when the opportunity in Kettle Springs came, Quinn didn't fight it. A fresh start was exactly what they needed, even if it was not what she wanted. Since you bring it up, I think I've decided. I think I'm gonna go to the party, Quinn said after Trudy was finally able to pry herself away from her dad's compliments. Good, you should, Dad said. Is the neighbor kid going? I like him. Doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that gets kicked out of many classes. No idea, Quinn admitted. And Rust. His name is Rust, Dad, she said, hoping repetition would help the information set congeal in Glenn Maybrook's brain. Her dad took a toast shovel of chipped beef and nodded absently. Weird name. Across Main Street, a few doors down, Quinn spotted Janet and a few other kids preparing to cross the street. Janet had her phone out, laughing to Ronnie, who mugged for the camera, side ponytail, and yet another new configuration. Next to next to Ronnie was a guy Quinn hadn't seen before. He was shorter than both girls, but no one would ever call him small. He was built like a fire hydrant, squat and solid. He held his arms out at his sides like he'd recently finished working out and was still enjoying the burn. Janet led the way as the three of them shot between parked cars. Was brazenly jaywalking another indicator that Janet had and company didn't give a fuck, or was there just not much traffic to pay attention to in Kettle Springs? Quinn realized she'd been staring too long and that her dad had been trying to talk to her the whole time. Then came the fear that her classmates could very well be crossing the street, crossing to the restaurant so they could grab a bite to eat. She stared intently at her mostly eaten toast and tried to think invisible thoughts. The girls are in my bio class, she said into the table, interrupting her dad's idle chatter. The bio class? He asked. Behind her, Quinn felt Sheriff Dunn once again shift in his seat. Her father's attention pivoted away from the window as the lawman behind her stood from his booth. Quinn didn't turn, but she could hear the sheriff's boots on the tile. Isolating that tiny sound caused her to realize another hush had fallen over the restaurant. Quinn raised her eyes. She could see the sheriff in the reflection of a hazy, wall-length mirror at the back of the room, leading to the bathrooms. The sheriff left his hat on the table to save a spot, as if to say, "This won't take long." Walking over, the sheriff spotted inside. Ah. Walking over, the sheriff stopped inside the door to the eatery and waited. Janet and her group paused on the sidewalk outside, looked up, wordlessly communicating with the man through the glass. And in that moment of stillness, Quinn saw it. The glass of the door was like a magic mirror out of a movie. One side there were yellowed newspaper clippings about giant pumpkin pies made from giant blue ribbon winning pumpkins, little old ladies wearing kitten sweaters that they'd knit themselves, and over the delicate small town the huge aged sheriff protecting law and order. On the other side, of what seemed like a different dimension, there were the kids with their iPhones, taking in the world through electric eyes a gigabyte at a time. There were boys in V-necks and girls in boy shorts, and that world was led by Janet, a vision Norman Rockwell never painted, black hair perfect, dressed in pink to match her nails, looking like a new stick of bubblegum. Was it Quinn's imagination, or did the sheriff's hand suddenly drift towards his gun as he peered out at the teenagers? No, couldn't be. The big man was simply adjusting his belt. Whatever he'd done with his hand, it was enough to defuse the situation. Janet smiled a "just kidding" smile to the sheriff, and the teens continued, zipping right past the door. The sheriff made a show of stretching, so tall, his arms so long that his knuckles nearly grazed on the stucco ceiling, and then he turned and headed back to the back of the restaurant towards the men's room. The murmurs, the sounds of rattling knives and forks against china, resumed. "Oh, wait," the sheriff said, doubling back. He clapped one large hand on her dad's shoulder. Glenn Maybrook looked immediately uncomfortable. The sheriff smiled, wide and warm, as if he hadn't just had a Mexican standoff with a trio of high schoolers. "You're the new doctor," the sheriff boomed, almost announcing it for the diner, as if that hadn't been already told. "Why, yes, I am. Hi, Glenn Maybrook," her dad said, visibly nodding away his discomfort and attempting to slip back into professional mode. The two of them shook, her dad's hand disappearing into the sheriff's like the big man was wearing a catcher's mitt. Glenn didn't get up, so the sheriff loomed over her dad, holding all the power. "Sheriff Dunn. Welcome to town, Doc." Her dad held his dopey smile, nodding. "I'm not going to interrupt your supper. I just wanted to say hello. We're so glad you made it, and just in time." "Yep, uh, her dad faltered. "Happy to be here. It's a great little town you have." "Sure is." The sheriff looked up, remembering something, or making a show of remembering, at least. "Actually," he reached into the top pocket of his shirt, behind his badge, and took out a small folded paper. "You probably already heard, but tomorrow is Founder's Day." He looked down, acknowledging Quinn for the first time. "I bet you're excited to have your first Friday in town and be without school, sweetheart. Looking forward to seeing you here." I'm not your sweetheart, motherfucker." She didn't know where the rage had come from. A good feminist upbringing, or maybe just the way the man said the word. But as far as the sheriff was concerned, at least she wasn't banned. "I didn't even know I had school off tomorrow." Quinn smiled, squeezing her own thigh under the tabletop to control herself. "You sure do." Sheriff Dunn said, then turned back to her dad. Kid time was over, apparently. Explains why my patients are canceling, I guess, her dad said, but Sheriff Dunn seemed not to hear or care, just continued on with his prepared spiel. The town's undergoing a bit of transition at the moment, and as a doctor, I'd love you to get involved. I'd love to get you involved in a positive way in the community. I know it's short notice, but we've got a town meeting tonight, the sheriff said, punctuating the words with a squeeze at Dad's shoulder. Be nice if you could come. Refreshments will be served, if you still got room. He chuckled, eyes down to Dad's empty plate. Her dad stood, apparently tired of being talked down to. That's mighty nice of you to ask. Clem winced at her dad's attempt to sound folksy. Mighty nice. God. Her dad continued, certainly try to be there. You can be there or not, right? There's no trying. The sheriff smiled wide. Nobody in Kettle Springs minced words, apparently. With unpacking and all, I don't think. Relax. I'm just making you squirm, Doc. But I understand. We'll get you at the next one, Sheriff said, and slapped again Glenn Maybrook on the back hard enough to send her dad's side into the tabletop, spilling both their waters. Trudy, the Sheriff Dunn said, then whistled between his teeth. A slice of pie for the doctor and his little gal, any flavor they want, but they want cherry. That's very kind, her dad said. Quinn still hung up on being called both a little girl and a sweetheart. And some napkins. The sheriff gave a firm nod and continued to the restroom. Her dad back to Quinn. Where were we? Oh yeah, you said you were gonna go to the party. But Quinn wasn't listening. She watched their waitress pass the sheriff and grab his arm. Thank you. That girl and her friend, they... The sheriff held one massive gray-haired hand up and waved Trudy away. Think nothing of it. Quinn's dad cleared his throat. Right. The party, Quinn said, snapping back to the present. No worries. And yes, promise if there's drinking and driving, I'll just call a lift. A lift? In Kettle Springs? Her dad snorted. Yeah, I guess you're right. Lift probably hasn't made it here yet. She shook her head. Her dad looked down at his hand. He unfolded the paper the sheriff had handed him. He had a familiar curl at the sides of his mouth. One Quinn recognized from before Samantha Maybrook had died, leaving them alone. But you know what has made it here? What? Quinn asked, almost afraid of whatever cornball response was coming from her dad next. Glenn Maybrook kept his impish smile, turned the flyer around to her, and spread its headline wide. The paper read, Make Kettle Springs Great Again. You're telling me a small town and fucking who knows what is conservative? Dude, this book is long as balls, dude. I didn't really expect it to be this long. I there's 30 chapters? Why? Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna be doing this for a while. I guess you will be seeing this cover a lot more. I feel like I've been reading so much of it, but I haven't. Oh my God, dude. Okay, well, that was chapter 4. It's pretty good. Got introduced to the sheriff. I'm curious at where that's gonna go. I'm hungry. It's 4 in the morning. I'm hungry. Things I do.